Hey guys, this is Luke, and I'm going to talk about some keys to nailing your taper. I think that's one of the, I don't know, not necessarily details we miss, but it's certainly something that doesn't have enough attention paid to it. And I'll admit, I probably didn't pay enough attention to it when writing the books, right? So this is really part one, really some general concepts, and then from there we'll move into some specific numbers and things like that. But for today, I want to talk about just five basic keys that everybody can take to heart, and then move on into creating a specific plan for yourself. But one of the biggest complaints I get from people that in particular follow the plans of the books is that they claim there is no taper, and and it's for a number of reasons, right? So maybe they're used to a plan where they're doing 5 days a week, and then they're doing really big long runs, and then they're just really overcooked, and so they just basically take two plus weeks and really scale everything way back, right? And so that's probably one of them. So it might be decreasing from 50 miles a week to 20 miles a week, no workouts, things like that, and then they see a taper that looks like it does in the HMM books, and they panic, right? And especially if they have the tendency to be overly aggressive on runs as it is. So you really have to be careful. But I want to say don't panic, right? Like there's no reason to panic. We take a look at what's going on, and then from there decide what really fits your needs best, because a taper can be very individualized for the athlete's current situation. But like I said, these are keys that everybody can take to heart. So the first key I would say is your volume and intensity. So the common thing here is to cut both, cut volume way back, cut intensity way back, and it just it really doesn't do you very much good. So the daily volume is scaled back, number of days reduced, the amount of intensity is scaled back, or it's even just taken out altogether. So if this sounds like you, I would ask you this question: do you end up feeling pretty sluggish by the time the race comes around, or do you really feel ready to rock, right? And so my experience is that people will say that they feel pretty sluggish, and so this could be one of the reasons why they do feel sluggish, is just cutting everything back so much that the body just kind of gets lulled to sleep a little bit. And the thing that tapers are trying to balance recovery and performance increases, and we're trying to pit that against detraining from doing too little. So we want to rest, but we don't want to rest so much that we actually start the detraining process. And so, I think you could do this for a little while, a short amount of time, like a week or so. But, I know many people who will taper 2 to 4 weeks at this kind of level, and it just ends up working against them, right? So if you're taking 2 to 4 weeks and you're drastically, say you're cutting your mileage back by 70%, and then maybe just doing like one workout during a week, or maybe just a couple over a 3-week period, that really, it's not going to make you lose like 25% of your fitness or anything. But I like to think of it this way: if you might say we lose 1 to 3% of our performance, and you say, well, okay, what's the big deal with that? But I would argue, you're willing to spend I would say a big chunk of money on a pair of shoes that will improve your performance by 1 to 3%. And you think about what that 1 to 3% would give you in terms of performance. So why would you spend that money on a shoe to give you that percentage, and then not take advantage of a proper taper that could give you the same amount of benefit, right? So now, instead of having a 2 to 3% improvement, you could have a 4 to 6% improvement if the taper is done right. So you see what I'm saying? So and if you do scale everything way so far back, you're essentially buying those shoes to get yourself back to the baseline that you would have been if you would have tapered in a proper manner. You see what I'm saying? So, that's a big thing, right? So like if you're 3% faster, and you could actually gain a little bit more from that by, properly tapering, then, that Boston qualifier all of a sudden becomes more attainable. Whatever the case is, or that, that time goal, whatever the case is, you put yourself in a much better position because now you've kind of increased that baseline of fitness and you're going to be able to perform at a higher level. So I don't want you to take that as not cutting the volume or workouts, and maybe even cutting some easy days back. And the same is true for the intensity, but find the balance that works best for you. If you find that you really need to cut back to extremes, and say you've done this more than once, if you've done it if this is your first time using the training plans, then maybe you were overstretched a little bit, and we do need to make sure that taper is pretty aggressive, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But for the most part, don't get so aggressive. If you've done it before, if you're training so hard that you need to be that aggressive on the taper, and you've done that multiple times with the same result, then the problem probably isn't the taper. The problem is probably the training leading up to the taper. It's either too aggressive, or the segment's too long, or something like that. And that's where I would focus your attention on the next segment, is how do I adjust that to make the taper more appropriate for what I'm trying to do. And so that's really the key that I want you to take away from that. The second thing, don't change your routine. And so I go back to things that Kevin and Keith have said. They've always told the teams, and when they're doing their clinics and things like that. But Kevin would always make the analogy of sleep. If you're used to getting, say, 6 hours of sleep a night, and then all of a sudden you get 12, do you usually feel really good that day you get to 12 hours, or do you tend to feel sluggish? Like for me personally, I feel pretty sluggish, right? So we want to make sure we're in the routine. We're keeping things the same. Now, if you can get 12 hours of sleep a night for the next 2 weeks, maybe that is something you want to consider. But for the most part, if you're only doing it for like a day or something, then it doesn't end up being that beneficial for you. My advice for you is, keep your routine as close as you can, right? So if you run 5 days a week, continue to run 5 days a week. You can still scale the mileage back, but scale those individual runs back and keep the days that you're running the same. If you do 2 workouts a week, continue to do 2 workouts a week. Again, we can scale back the volume on those, but we can keep the routine of making sure that, your easy day on Monday, a workout on Tuesday, Wednesday off, see what I'm saying? So we can keep that routine, but we can work with what the workouts are on those days that you would normally be running anyway. So keep the routine and just scale back on that volume a little bit. And then intensity would be the same. I would even say you can argue being a little bit faster on some of those things, but the overall volume would be less of those workouts. So the third thing would be analyzing where you are at. And so as you enter the final stretch, I think it's key to take an honest assessment of where you are from a fitness standpoint. Look over your training. How much were you able to get in? Does your training line up with what your goals originally were? Maybe I need to readjust my goals. So like recording this, the big concern is, I haven't been able to hit my paces on a regular basis. Like so right now it's hot. We're in the middle of a heat wave. And for a lot of people, they're starting to get into that crunch time of their fall marathons coming up quick. It's end of August now, but October's right around the corner. I mean, next week is September, and then boom, we're right in the middle of the season, right? And so that's a big concern right now. Is they haven't been able to hit their goal pace in their workouts. It's been a struggle to hit goal pace, or they just were too slow for a lot of their big workouts. And I discussed this scenario specifically in other writings, so I'm not going to do it here. But the point is that they question if they've done enough. Are they ready to reach their goal and things like that? So I would ask myself these questions. Did I miss a significant amount of time in the last 8 weeks? So if I'm 10 days before my race, I'd take a look back over the last 2 months, 8 weeks. Have I been able to get most of what I've been prescribed in? And have I missed any significant amount of time? Like, so in 8 weeks, have I missed, a week or 2 of running, right? And I'm talking at one point, right? I had an injury, had to take a week off. Maybe I took 2 weeks off. If I've done that, maybe I need to scale back a little bit. But if it was, if you did, but you were able to cross train, go back to the recovery and the detraining stuff that I've written, but you can kind of work that out. But the main point is that if you missed a lot of time, you didn't do anything, yeah, you're probably gonna have to adjust your time. But if you're able to get workouts in, you're pretty close on paces, or you adjusted for heat and humidity, and you're pretty much in the range, then I would say go for it, right? Like when you taper, and ideally you get some better weather on the race, that pace is going to feel so much better, right? And so the point is, if you can answer yes to, if you can't answer no to missing any time, if you if you didn't get the majority of your workouts, I would say 90% of those workouts over that last 8 weeks, and the paces, if you can't reasonably say, yeah, I was pretty good on all that, you might need to adjust. But if you were pretty good on all those things and you're pretty confident the taper is going to get you where you need to be, then go full steam ahead, right? And then, make the race day adjustments. If it's hot, we scale back, or if it's a good day, we allow ourselves some freedom there a little bit. But for the most part, you got to take an assessment of how the training went. And if the training didn't go very well, but you're still going to attempt that pace, you might be in a little bit of trouble. But the point here is just get your head in the space, right? The space it needs to be for the race. Don't overthink. Don't be overthinking, but just take an honest assessment where you are at. Make that plan and stick with it. And then go from there. But that's the whole point of this one. Just get into that headspace of, okay, now it's getting close to the race. I need to be on point here. Fourth thing I have is get to the line. So at this point, if I'm looking at my schedule and I think there's no way I can run what's on it, then do what's best for you, right? If you need some time down, and maybe that's not taking days completely off, but maybe scaling way back on a few days and just getting a nice, easy few miles in, then go ahead and do that. If you're just wiped out, nursing something that could end up being worse if you push to the finish, you trained over your head, then recover. The main point now is you've done that work. You want to get to the starting line. You want to be in the race. So to me, whatever you've got to do to get there, then go ahead and do it. If you're in the Marathon Mastery course, we talk about this in the recovery module over that last 6 weeks about where some things that you can do that would really kind of pulling out all the stops and get your body in the best position you can, because you've done all the training. Now you got to make sure it's ready to go. And so if you're really dragging, you're on the verge of being injured, anything like that, then pull out all the stops in my mind. And then just, even if you're switching days to cross train just to take off some stress on impact and things like that, whatever you got to do, because the fitness is there. We just got to make sure you feel good getting to the line. And the fifth thing is to not overcook yourself. If you're at a point where you don't think that you've done enough, now is not the time to try and cram that fitness in. I've tried it myself, and honestly, it always has made things worse than what it would have been. And in all honesty, I think being a little underprepared is better than being overcooked. If you are underprepared, you still have a shot to hit that home run, right? Like, you can still catch a flyer and really nail a race. And this is especially true, I think, if you're more seasoned, just because you've been there before, you've done the training before, you have things going on with muscle memory and things like that where you probably have a little bit more leeway. And then I would even say for like more of the true beginner. So I get a lot of people who, they maybe have done a marathon, but they didn't really have any idea what they were doing. They just went out there for fun and ran, 4.5 hours. Now they're trying to run, 3:30, but they'd be super happy if they broke 4. Well, they still would have a pretty good chance at doing that just because their fitness was probably still much better than what it was the first time they ran the marathon. And so they might just be surprising themselves. And it's hard to say, what they train to versus what their capabilities are. So to me, just being a little, if you're anything, you're a little underprepared and you give yourself an opportunity on race day. Whereas if you're overcooked, I feel like there's little chance that you'll be able to mentally or physically find the need to pull through that performance. I think if you're overcooked, it's just more mentally challenging to wrap your head around what you have to do, because then it just seems even so much more difficult, and it feels like it's hard right from the start. And when it is, it's something you start dwelling on a lot earlier, and I think it's easier just to mentally shut it down. And then physically, if you're overcooked, you're overcooked, and it's just you most of you know how it is to run a race when you're just tired, right? It doesn't end up usually going very well. And to stretch that out for a performance over 26 miles, that's a tall order to ask anybody. At the end of the day, I think following these guidelines can help give you some individualization on a taper that will work best for you. Whether you're using a plan from the book or online, you have to understand that the authors of the plan, and that's HMM, that's Hal Higdon, Jeff Galloway, whoever, they're trying to provide a template that will work for most people based on their philosophy, right? And so it's really up to you to take the best information you can. And mainly what I'm talking about is information from your own biofeedback, right? How did you respond to training? What have you done in the past? What's worked in the past? What hasn't worked in the past? Take all those things and make it individual to your specific needs and what your training has done for you. And if you can do that, then you'll vastly increase the chances for nailing the taper and putting that hard-earned training to use. So I would take that to heart. And like I said, if you're in the Marathon Mastery course, I'm going to do a couple more lessons where we talk more about what the physiological things are going on with the taper, different tapering strategies. There's 4 or 5 pretty main strategies. What typically works best, and then we'll go from there and give you some specific numbers. But to wrap it up, I would just say, the longer the training segment is, probably a little bit longer taper that you need. So if you're doing a 20, 22, 24 week plan, that's probably an opportunity to take, 2 to 3 weeks off. But we'd have to talk about what those 2 to 3 weeks would actually look like. And then, the shorter the race segment, I would say the less taper you need, right? So once you get into, or if you've done like a 8 to 14 week plan, you're looking at maybe about a week of actual taper, whereas, like a 14 to 18 week plan, you're looking at that 1 to 2 weeks really. And then beyond that, you're 2+ weeks. So there's some things to keep in mind. And like I said, we'll go from there and we'll give you some more specifics on that. But if you can follow those 5 kind of general principles and then take from your own past experiences and then really assess how your training has went, then you can make some really good decisions on how to individualize that taper for your own specific needs. Okay, so that's it for today. And we'll jump into another lesson later on. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.